Welcome back to our next segment on employment and disability. In this segment, we're going to be talking about support strategies and solutions to help people with disabilities find and maintain employment. And again, there's many more things that we can talk about than I've been able to put in today's lesson, so please look at our resources if you would. Certainly, one of the things that we want to think about is, I'm talking about all these people with disabilities, but where do you find them? How do you know? I mean, even if you have this desire, it's like I would like to employ someone with a disability. Where might you find them? But there are programs, and one of the most important ones in the United States is the Vocational Rehabilitation Program. It's a state federal program, so every state in the country has an agreement basically with the federal government. The federal government sends them money. The state has to have a match. It's most of it comes from the feds. A much smaller portion comes from the states. So within each state, you've got this agency that will provide services to people with disabilities to help them find employment. And those services could be, as simple as, counseling, could be providing accommodations, could be sending them for education. There's a variety of things that can be done, within the vocational rehabilitation realm to help that person get a job. And it's an interesting thing because this program has been around since World War I, so we have a very long history for it. And as federal programs go, that's pretty remarkable. But what Congress has been able to do and what people have been able to do over the years is to show that it's cost effective. Because again, think about that. Which is more expensive? Providing some money up front to give an individual with a disability the training, the supports, whatever is necessary for them to get a job, or to pay for them, to give them a monthly check for Social Security and give them Medicaid coverage for the rest of their lives. So big picture thinking, vocational rehabilitation as a program is incredibly effective and incredibly cost efficient. And in fact, within the program in which I teach, I'm in the College of Health and Human Sciences, in the School of Allied Health and Communicative Disorders. We have a vocational rehabilitation program where it's a master's program and we're teaching students how to work with typically adults who have disabilities and prepare them for vocational rehabilitation kinds of jobs to help with disabilities and also to work with employers. Because as we were talking a little bit ago, employers have lots of hesitation, there's concerns, lack of knowledge. So there's the kind of employer development part of it that's part of this process as well. So vocational rehabilitation is a huge benefit for a lot of people with disabilities. And I would also mention another aspect of this, and this one from my family is important. While I certainly work in an area of vocational rehabilitation, at a personal level with my stepson and with my brother, both of them would be considered, say if you will, vulnerable. They're not going to be able to go out on their own and apply for a job. They're not going to be able to deal with transportation. They're going to need supports. And so there is an aspect of how things work called supported employment. And supported employment is huge because oftentimes, the person just needs a little bit of assistance to maintain a job or to find a job. As an example, my brother, when he came to live with me, no job, and so what do we do? And there was a grocery chain that's nearby us, and I noticed that they had a history of, hiring some people with developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities as baggers, if you would. And my brother, I thought, might be a perfect job for him. And we went in, and the very first time we went in, I talked to one of the managers, and they said, "Oh, sorry, we're not hiring any more people with disabilities right now." And I was stunned by that and kind of walked out the door shaking my head. And then a few hours later went back in and said, "May I speak to the manager?" And I talked to the manager and said, "You know what? One of your people here said that you aren't hiring people with disabilities anymore." And that just strikes me as really odd because, I'm a professor at Northern and teach about this stuff. And needless to say, my brother was hired immediately. But when he was hired, there was a bit of a problem because, anymore now when you're at the grocery store, what do they ask you when you're checking out? Paper or plastic, right? Well, so he's bagging, and from the store standpoint, the plastic is less expensive, and so that's the direction that people tend to go. So when he's bagging things up, what if the customer says, "Oh, excuse me, I would like paper"? Since he's deaf, he didn't hear them, so he keeps putting them into these plastic. It created a bit of a problem because the customer feels like, yo, buddy. And then once they find out he's deaf, the customer is embarrassed, and the store certainly doesn't want that. And so with supported employment, my brother had a job coach, and they made a very simple solution. The name tag that he had to wear had a little asterisk on it that said, my name is, and I'm deaf. If you want paper, please get my attention. That solved the problem. A no-cost accommodation just took a little bit of planning. Right now, from a supported employment standpoint, my stepson has had a number of years of support. He works at a business called Therapy Care. And Therapy Care provides physical therapy, speech therapy, and so forth. And while it took us a long time to find him that job, once there, he had supports from a program called the Association for Individual Development and had a job coach come out. And so when he went there, he had no real clerical skills. He now has been taught to do filing. He's certainly shredding, calling therapists to request their weekly reports and so forth. He has broadened his abilities and skills tremendously. Would not have happened had he not had the ability to have some supports on the job. Let's hear from Lori regarding her perspectives and experience regarding job coaching and her son's employment.
In the United States, students with disabilities have the right to a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment through their 21st birthday, so up until their 22nd birthday. So my son attended a post-high school vocational training program that helped him learn continued functional academics, community skills such as using public transportation, shopping, navigating neighborhoods, navigating streets, things like that. At that point, the Vocational Rehabilitation Services were actively involved with that school programming, so that they were also looking for job skills placements. He had a placement during school in the public library. He had a placement on the university bookstore, in the university campus. So things like that were done at that level. Once he commenced from that program, then the case management was taken over by Department of Rehabilitation Services. Now, we were lucky enough to get a wonderful case manager who set him up with a wonderful job coach. And even with those wonderful supports, it still took them about 9 months for Bryce to find competitive employment, that is, employment he's getting paid for, and that was supported by a job coach. And that only came about because his job coach had developed a relationship with a manager of a local restaurant. So his wonderful job coach that we got through AID, Association for Individual Development, was there to identify appropriate jobs that he could apply for, help him with the application process, attend the interview to help coach through the interview, get it once on the job site to determine ways to accommodate his needs. For example, she had a written schedule of what he was meant to do every 15 minutes, because he performs better when knowing exactly what to do instead of having to make decisions about what should be done next. Things like putting a bright red sign under where the dishes were to remind him to change that water every 2 hours was the restaurant policy. So things like that, a job coach is very helpful in simplifying written directions. There's lots of postings on the bulletin boards about, notice this to employees, and so she would be there to simplify that language for him. She was also there to help intervene with the management. A lot of her work was helping the management understand how to accommodate Bryce in the workplace. The attitudes we went through several managers, and most of them were wonderful and very understanding, very supportive. Well, I think, we have to remember he is, as most people with disabilities are, underemployed, employed below their skill level. So looking for employment, that was another important thing. He went from just shredding paper to now he's filing, he's entering into the database, he's calling people to remind them of things. He's filling out calendars. He's just doing so much more than when we first started, and that was because the employer and the job coach were continually looking for new challenges. So I would encourage that in any employment, and certainly remember that that is an issue for all people with disabilities.
And then the final thing I would say as we look at this issue of supports and strategies is the idea of trying to match the person with a job that would be helpful to them. Because we have to, none of us want to work at a job where we don't feel we match. So just because you have a disability doesn't mean that any job is the one that's best for you. So to the extent that you can have a match between who the person is and the job, it's important. And as for those of us who provide services, we need to think about it from the standpoint of functionally, what does the job require and what needs to be done? My background is in deafness, and have available as a link for you a manual that I created a number of years ago. It's a functional communication assessment measure. And the whole point of that measure is to say, for people who are deaf and who are like my brother, who would classify as lower functioning, you're not going to change him to where he can speak fluently and carry on a conversation. But can you, within that setting, figure out what he has to communicate and what are the strategies that are available to him, and what's most important? Because if you can address those things, he can be successful on the job. It's not going to be that he's going to sit and have a long conversation with you ever, but functionally knowing what's necessary is huge. So in summary, as we think about this, we'd just like to emphasize that there are a lot of workers out there with disabilities who are available. Strategies for finding them, certainly a prime strategy is going through your state's vocational rehabilitation program. That certainly supported employment is huge. The idea that there are many people who just need some supports, to be successful. And finally, the idea that when we can, certainly as much as possible, you want a job that fits for the person, that matches with their interests, abilities, and background. So with that, I will close and we'll move into our final segment where I give you a little more direct information on the idea of accommodations.